Otis and the Kittens, read by Susu. Take number 4. It was hot and dry on the farm where the friendly little tractor named Otis lived. Otis could not remember the last time it had rained. Farmers all over the valley grew more anxious by the day. Water was in short supply, the ground was hard, and the corn stalks were half as tall as they should have been. Otis spent his afternoons out in the sweltering fields with the farm hands baling straw. Once the load was full, with a puff and a chuff, Otis would pull the wagon into the old barn down by the bend at Mud Creek. The farm hands would use a pulley to lift each bale into the loft where it would be stored for the long winter to come. When the sun had gone down over the hill and the work was done, Otis was ready to sit in the shade and rest. But not Otis's friend the bull. The bull liked to stand in front of Otis and snort and snarl and huff hot air. 2 snorts, a snarl, and a huff. All the animals knew what that meant. The bull was challenging Otis to a game of tug-of-war. Otis smiled. His friends were always eager to play, even after a long day of work. One duck wound the end of a rope around the bull's horns, and another duck looped the other end around Otis's steering wheel. The animals then took sides, grabbing on any way they could. Everyone pulled and tugged and tugged and pulled with all their might. Eventually, Otis would ease up a little. He didn't care so much about winning. He just liked having fun with his friends. One afternoon, when everyone was up under the shade of the apple tree, Otis spotted something moving down in the field. It looked like an orange tabby cat. Where did she come from? Otis wondered. He watched as she ran toward the old barn, and there he saw something that caused his engine to sputter. A swirl of smoke. Otis raced to the barn with the farm animals following behind. They discovered flames coming from the loft inside the old barn. A fire! The barn was filled with brittle, dry straw, and Otis knew it wouldn't take long for all of it to burst into flames. Just then, the tabby cat appeared in the barn window. With a put, puff, puttity chuff, Otis rushed into the burning barn. Inside, the flames were growing and smoke was forming a dark cloud. The cat was pacing back and forth, high above on a rafter. Otis chuffed for her to jump down, but the cat would not budge. Instead, she stared down at Otis and belted out the loudest meow Otis had ever heard. What was she trying to tell him? Suddenly, Otis heard a tiny meow from the hayloft, and then another tiny meow, and then another, and another, and another, and another. At once, 5 furry little heads popped up and stared down at him. Kittens! As the flames blazed overhead, Otis stood on his hind wheels and stretched to the edge of the loft. To a chorus of tiny meows, one by one, the kittens hopped down. The farm animals cheered hooray as Otis emerged from the burning barn with kittens all over him. But as soon as Mama Cat counted their little heads, she meowed frantically back at the barn. This time, Otis had no doubt what she was saying. How many more kittens were still in there, he wondered. By then, the top of the barn was engulfed in flames, sending large plumes of smoke into the sky. Otis was very afraid, but he gunned his engines and he screeched his tires and he dashed back into the burning barn. Inside, the heat was growing worse and it was hard to breathe. Otis revved his engine and one last little head popped up, trembling with fear. Otis puffed a gentle chuff and the kitten climbed down on top of him, hopped to his seat, leaped to the floor, and scampered out of the barn to safety. Outside, the animals cheered hooray when they saw another kitten emerge, and they watched for Otis to follow. Inside, the flames spread by the second. Otis wheeled around to see if any more kittens were left. The old boards of the barn's floor creaked and buckled and moaned. The walls popped. He couldn't wait another second. Just as Otis spotted the exit and raced his wheels to leave, there was a giant crash. The floor collapsed and Otis plunged into the darkness below. Outside, the animals held their breath, waiting for their friend to emerge from the burning barn. Inside, Otis could not move. He had fallen into the cluttered lower level of the barn, and he was covered in dust and debris and broken planks. Stuck in the hole with a fire raging above, Otis could hardly puff a breath. Then he heard the siren of Fire Chief Douglas and the fire engine. The farmer pulled up, and Otis heard him rounding up the animals. Help had arrived. He knew he would be fine. That is, until he heard Fire Chief Douglas holler, "Sorry, farmer, the creek's gone dry in the drought, and the water supply is too low to save your old barn. As long as everyone's safe, we'll just have to let her burn." Underneath the pile of broken boards and dust, Otis couldn't see a thing or move a gasket, and his heart sank deep inside his engine. The animals had grown wild with fear. The farmer counted them one by one. They were all safe and sound. He could not figure out why they were acting so crazy. Suddenly, the little calf bolted for the barn door, and her friends followed right behind her. Inside the fiery barn, they spotted Otis stuck down in the hole, covered in boards and dust. His engine was barely running. How could they ever get Otis out? The bull looked up at the rafters and down at Otis. He stood in front of the hole in the floor, and he snorted and he snarled and he huffed hot air. 2 snorts, a snarl, and a huff. The animals knew exactly what that meant. One duck grabbed the pulley rope and wound it around the bull's horns, and another duck flew into the hole and hooked it into Otis's steering wheel. The bull snorted and tugged and snarled and pulled and tugged and pulled, but Otis did not budge. The horse and the cow grabbed the rope behind the bull, and together they snorted and they tugged and they neighed and they mooed and they pulled and they tugged. And Otis teetered ever so slightly. The little calf jumped in, and he tugged and he bawled and he pulled and he tugged, and Otis raised just a little bit more. The puppy grabbed the rope behind the little calf, and with a fierce arf, tugged and pulled and growled and tugged and pulled as Otis inched upwards. And then came the piercing meow and the sound of Fire Chief Douglas shouting, "Holy moly! Otis is in there! Hold on tight, everyone! I am here to help!" Fire Chief Douglas grabbed the end of the rope and tugged and pulled and pulled and tugged. All together, the animals and Fire Chief Douglas lifted Otis higher and higher and higher until finally he was suspended above the hole. The ducks swooped in and pushed him over to the edge of the opening where they could lower him to the floor. Together, everyone pulled the dust and ash-covered tractor out from the burning fire just as parts of the barn began to fall. Then Fire Chief Douglas and his men hosed off Otis and wiped down his frame. The cool water revived Otis, and everyone cheered hooray when they heard a faint put, puff, puttity chuff. The sound was music to their ears. The kittens jumped up on top of Otis and crawled all over him. Fire Chief Douglas laughed and said, "Hey, Farmer, what say we adopt these kittens and their mama? They would make mighty fine additions to our firehouse family." Otis puffed a happy chuff. He could not think of a better home for his new friends. The end. Love, Susu. I sure do miss you, boys. Bye.